Each and every day, we are confronted with a plethora of choices. Several of these are minor, such as what to wear or what to eat for breakfast. Others are significant and can have a significant impact on the direction of our lives. While we humans use a variety of decision making tactics, we frequently succumb to a variety of typical fallacies, biases, and other decision making issues or problems. So, we need to discover which faulty decision making and roadblocks may be influencing the daily choices we make. So, according to these two esteemed people, namely Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who spent decades studying how people make decisions, so they discovered that individuals are influenced by a variety of factors, which are overconfidence bias, hindsight bias, anchoring bias, framing bias, and escalation of commitment. So, these are the decision making traps that we need to avoid. One of the issues or problems that can influence decision making is our inclination to overestimate our own knowledge, ability, or judgment, and that is overconfidence bias. The term overconfidence bias refers to a circumstance in which what you choose to believe is bigger than the truth. So, overconfidence bias occurs when you begin to rely on your own judgments and perceptions of things rather than reality. Remember the times when I was an Ascan, I was over optimistic that it will not be hard landing on the moon, and I overestimated my abilities, but I was wrong. Being an astronaut, all I can say is it's hard to land on the moon, and there is really a high risk of landing on the moon, and there's a 50-50 chance of survival. And here I am, thankfully, still alive and talking to you guys today. So, overconfidence bias may lead you to make risky decisions. In addition, overconfidence in our own moral character can cause us to act without proper reflection, and that is when we are most likely to act unethically. And you, being a leader in your company or organization or whatever it is, you should be humble because leaders who are humble produce better results for their organization and are less likely to make mistakes. Overconfident leaders, on the other hand, cost their company valuable credibility and are much more likely to be fired. Humble leaders admit their mistakes, whereas arrogant leaders are unable to admit their mistakes or recognize areas for improvement. Overconfidence is a characteristic that is frequently acquired through increased power. As a leader's power grows, it is frequently more difficult for the leader to admit errors or wrongdoings of any kind. As a result, they are less willing to learn from their mistakes in order to achieve. As a leader, it is critical to remember that there is a fine line between humility and overconfidence. While it is acceptable to be confident, it is critical to understand where that confidence comes from and how it impacts the organization. So seek to balance both humility and confidence. So I want to share this with you. A humble leader does not think less of themselves, but think more of others than themselves. So no to overconfidence bias. Another decision-making trap is hindsight bias. So, do you ever look back on an event and feel like you should know what the outcome would be? In psychology, this tendency to look back and see all the signs that led to a certain outcome is called the hindsight bias. This propensity, sometimes referred to as the I know it all along phenomena, might lead us to feel that we can actually foresee outcomes in situations that are truly dependent on. For example, before when I was an astronaut, I gambled. I may incorrectly feel that I can perfectly anticipate the outcome of a card game, but in actuality, because the game is based on probability, I have no way of knowing what would happen. And another example of the hindsight bias include a person believing they predicted who would win this coming election. So hindsight bias can lead to overconfidence in your ability to predict what is going to happen. And this can lead to poor decision making and can affect how you assign blame for it. This hindsight bias can be problematic when it leads you to assume that you should have been able to predict the outcome of situations that were not at all predictable. As a result, you may base future decisions on what you learned from prior failures. Rather than relying on elements relevant to the current circumstance, you may find yourself attempting to predict the outcome based on previous possibly unrelated experiences. So, how can we deal with this trap? So, first, you need to remind yourself that you can't predict the future. You need to examine the data and always make decisions based on what the data says, not based on what you think and feel. And you must also consider alternate outcomes and analyze the outcome so that we can avoid this hindsight bias. Another faulty decision is when people make decisions, they tend to rely too much on pre existing information or the first information they come across. This is known as anchoring bias. Anchoring is a term that refers to an individual's tendency to rely excessively on a single piece of information. Job seekers or applicants frequently fall into this trap by focusing solely on a desired wage and ignoring other components of the job offer, such as additional benefits, job fit, and working environment. Anchoring trap is a tendency for us to rely too heavily on the first information we receive. Sometimes people use such techniques to manipulate you either intentionally or accidentally. A couple of things we can do to deal with the anchoring trap is to make sure that you always view a problem from different perspectives and think about the problem on your own first, and also think about being careful when you're giving advice from different people to avoid anchoring your advisors and your consultants. Another trap in decision making is framing bias. Framing bias is when someone may be influenced by the way a situation is presented. Usually, a person will lean towards the more relatable or liked situation. People are risk adverse when a problem is posed when referring to avoiding losing. This influences people to be more biased towards a situation than by reviewing all aspects of the situation depending on how a situation presents itself can result in different responses. An example of this would be when we landed back to Earth and after months I decided to buy a TV. So when I went to the mall, two of the same TVs are on sale. So option 1 has a 30% off sale and option 2 has a $130 off sale. So they both equal out to the same discount, but $130 off looks better than 30% off to customers. So I bought the TV that is $130 off. So the question is how to overcome this trap. The best way is to look at the initial problem in different ways before making a decision. Think about the framing of the problem when it comes to a decision, and lastly, when hearing others' input on a situation, view how they were influenced. Another decision-making trap is escalation of commitment. This trap is sometimes called a sunken cost fallacy. A sunken cost fallacy is when someone can be tied up to a certain project or situation due to previous choices. It is usually when someone has put in a lot of effort at time and their pride can conflict the decision to let it go due to the situation or problem being irrecoverable. A person's pride can step in the way to where they cannot admit they could have made a mistake. A great idea many companies tend to do is inform their executives when to cut their losses. A great example of sunken cost fallacy is, for instance, I invested $500 into a stock. In a few months, that stock has dropped to $100. I already invested the time and money, so I choose to stay invested instead of selling. The sunken cost trap is the tendency to make a choice in a way that justifies past choices, even when the past choices no longer seem valid. Here are several ways to avoid this escalation of commitment. Make sure you seek out views of people who were uninvolved with the earlier decisions and are unlikely to be committed to those decisions. Also focus in your goals. We make decisions in order to reach goals, so don't become attached to the particular series of steps that you took towards the goals. Always consider how you can better fulfill that goal from now on. Some of you become leaders in industry and maybe you already have people working for you. So make sure that not only you do this for yourself, but you do this for others. So don't cultivate failure, like a failure-fearing culture that leads employees to continue their mistakes. Not only you, but your team needs to be able to admit those mistakes and make the right decisions going forward. In conclusion, at any point in the decision-making process, we can have biases and misconceptions. A leader can fall into one or more of these traps while making a decision. A leader should regularly practice the tips on how to avoid these traps, such as brainstorming with others or to make sure to evaluate all the information given. Once again, this is Abigail Leocario. Fly high, soar high.